We are ready. You can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say, good day, good evening. I don't know where you are joining us, in which part of the world you are, but I'm really very excited that you could make it for this special launch of ours of the Yuma Lasford Publishing African Seminar Series 2021. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion. Thank you for making time. In the world where we are all zoomed out, thank you for making it, especially for this one. Thank you. I welcome you. My name is Itai Makone. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Yuma, and I'll be hosting this seminar series with my colleague, Ibrahim Nang, who is also in this room in collaboration with him. This project, this African Publishing Seminar Series, is a project that is funded by the Open Society Foundation. The overall project is to strengthen African publishing and dissemination. It's to really, the seminar series is a platform for us to share experiences, for us to share and explore challenges, experiences of where the opportunities, the avenues to strengthen can be found, to strengthen the publishing sector, to strengthen the knowledge dissemination sector. And to do this, we curated this African Seminar Series, and my colleagues are also working on a podcast series. Job Maura and Yusra Hamdawi are creating a podcast series that will align with the same objectives to have a space for critical conversation of how can we strengthen African publishing and ecosystem in Africa. And this project is a collaboration between the University of UCT, it is a collaboration between Yuma at UCT, University of Cape Town, and LASPAD is based in Gothenburg in Senegal. And today we have a very special guest. Our very special guest today is Professor Mamadou Diawara, and we're very excited to glean from his insights of what he has to share. But before we hand over to Professor Mamadou, I just want to ask Professor Mame Penda to just give us a brief of LASPAD, and then Dr. Divine Fu, just a brief 2-minute introduction of Yuma. Over to you, Professor Penda Ba. Okay.
Here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Itai. Thank you very much. I'm very, very pleased to be here and to be part of this first seminar of our program. And welcome, everyone. We are very pleased to have our special guest today. So I was just asked to introduce the lab, one of the partners of this program. LASPAD is a laboratory research lab based in West Africa, in Senegal, and more specifically in the north of Senegal. Maybe you have heard of Gaston Berger University. So LASPAD is a young interdisciplinary lab, and we aim, one of the deep core of of this lab is really to work around what we can call one of the weakness of our universities, knowledge creation and dissemination. So since the creation of this lab, this was our main focus: how to help enhance our young researchers and not young researchers to produce valuable research that can be disseminated all around the world. And This program is a very special and very unique one for Gaston Berger University for lots of reasons. And I really want to thank very deeply our partner, our donor, OSF, Open Society Foundation, through HESP, Higher Education Support Program. And I really want to thank them because we have this long discussion around these issues, and they are committed to help us go understand the big issues around knowledge creation and disseminations. I must say scholarly creation and dissemination in the continent, and to help African voices, and especially African young voices, young researchers to be heard, to have the opportunity to be part of mainstream discussion, and to bring new knowledges and disruptive knowledges and innovative knowledges. And we have several tools to do that. Classical research that is being conducted, but these spaces are very special and unique for us because it brings scholars all around the world to be part of these discussions, and most important thing, we are trying to have a multilingual space. I myself are francophone, for example, and I speak African languages, but being part of this space is something really important because we have this kind of fermeture, I don't know how to say it, but that, yeah, the francophone space is very close one, having very little discussion with the anglophone one, with the lusophone one, and with the Arabic space. So we are trying to have a continental discussion because we have very common issues, but we have very specific ones related to the region, to the country, to the history of one space in particular. So we are trying to deal with all these very interlinked and very complex issues. And once again, I'm very happy to be part of the project. I thank again our partner, and I'm very excited to be working with UCT, which is a main partner for Gaston Berger. And I'm delighted to be working with my colleague and friend, Divine Fu. And we are sharing lots and lots of projects now. And I think that this connection between the north and the west and the francophone part of the continent and the south is something definitely needed. And thanks again, Itai, and all the postdocs, Nya, Yusra, etc. And yeah, thank you very much for the work done so far. And I'm really excited. And thank you again, Prof, for being our first keynote speaker and our special guest. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. We'll hand over to Divine.
Itai, thank you. There's not much that I could add apart from just saying that we are excited about this project, about the launch of this project and the number of initiatives that already began late last year. And we are going to be doing a 54-country intervention, just trying to strengthen the publishing infrastructure and make interventions at the level of the ecosystem across the continent. So this first year is just to try to understand the kinds of interventions that we need to do in order to strengthen this infrastructure. And it is such a privilege to have so many people, offer their time, to participate in this project, both the postdocs and both the people working in the market research team, master research team, like I see Francois is there, Raga Makawi, Sandra Chamele, Mamadou Drame, Justin Cox, which are collaborators from people who are doing important interventions, on the African continent. And we are hoping that through that, we can actually demonstrate and also push governments and push institutions and funders to invest, like the Open Society Foundation is doing with Sonia Languin, whom I see is in the room, to strengthen the knowledge infrastructure. So join us and follow us with the podcast and also with the seminar series and the report that we are going to publish at the end of the year, and which becomes an annual report called the State of African Scholarly Publishing. So, and thank you, Mamadou, for helping to launch this. Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you, Divine. I'll hand over to Ibrahim to introduce our speaker for today. Ibrahim?
Yes.
Okay. You're muted.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome to our distinguished guest, Professor Mamadou Diawara. And today we have the honor and the pleasure to launch our first seminar series, organized both by the two institutes, LASPAT Gaston Berger in Senegal and Huma Institute. So briefly, I have to present Mamadou Diawara. Mamadou Diawara is currently fellow at the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies. He holds the anthropology chair at the Goethe Universität in Frankfurt, Maine since 2004. He also is deputy director of the Frobenius Institute. He is founding director of Point Seed, the Center for Research on Local Knowledge in Bamako, Mali. Diawara is the director of the program Point Seed, funded by the German Research Foundation. He coordinated the postdoctoral program Knowledge for Tomorrow since 2011. He's member of the German Consortium for the Merian Institute for Advanced Studies in Africa. He is council member of the International African Institute in London. He was director of the Center for Interdisciplinary African Studies of the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Before 2004, he taught at Yale University as well as the University of Georgia. He is principal investigator for the Cluster of Excellence Research Project, the formation of normative order at Frankfurt University. He was PI for the Africa's Asian option, funded by the BMBF at the Frankfurt University, AFRAZO, from 2030 to 2090. He had several fellowships at renowned institutions such as Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin, the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Studies, the Institute for Advanced Studies in Nantes. He was joined Jeffon Baker Fellow at the University of Laval in Canada. Diawara's research focuses on oral tradition and history, as well as the media, the relation between Asia and Africa migration and development issues in sub-Saharan Africa. So thank you for this.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Prof.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, dear Divine, dear Ibrahima, dear Itai, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for your generous invitation. I'm truly moved and honored to take the floor at UCT. I'm grateful to have discovered this fantastic institution thanks to my friends, Henrietta and Francis Nyanjo, who offered my wife and myself the opportunity to visit the campus and its splendid domain a few weeks ago. Now the devastating fire that destroyed the University of Cape Town's Jaeger library on Sunday, 18th of April happened. We are profoundly sorry and hope that much more grandiose things will arise from these ashes. We are talking about publication. Divine Francis meant, as we were talking about this issue in Cape Town a couple of weeks ago, they meant that copyright is part of the matter, and convinced me it was not very difficult, because I love this university, UCT, and our fantastic friends there. They convinced me to participate to this opening, and I was truly enchanted by this offer. Since we are in South Africa and we are talking about copyright, everybody could remember, I guess, the astounding article of the New York Times on March 22nd, 2006, about the court case won by a South African family who received $1.5 million from the multinational Walt Disney. So 3 daughters of Solomon Linda, a migrant laborer, and also of the famous piece, The Line Sleeps Tonight, who died in 1962. These families sued and won the case according to the rule of the Dickens Clause of 1911. So, since we are in South Africa, I do not need to comment on this issue. We know it already, you know it. What does mean copyright for ordinary Africans facing intellectual property matters willy-nilly? So the following paper, the following talk tackles the particular field of intangible goods through a bias that is offered by lawyers and by sociologists, because anthropologists didn't do much about this issue beside the last 5-10 years. So this talk describes how the concept of romantic author confronts reality, African reality on the ground. It studies the relationship between the producer of oral histories in sub-Saharan Africa and his and her protector or patron over centuries-old history. Subsequently, I would expose the profound uphill that the copyright means for these ordinary people. It explains, this paper explains how we come to a situation where those who are granted copyright at the risk of becoming prisoners act to get rid of these copyrights, while at the same time claiming this copyright. It's a sort of paradox, but paradoxical situation. And this is what we'll try to grapple with. Therefore, I base my research on a deeply historical ethnography to write a deeply ethnographic history, to use the phrasing of Karin Barber, on the relationship that links the creator and the recipient of his or her message. So music and poetry, related to history or not, are profoundly rooted in the past and of the West African societies. So from the times of the so-called West African empires, from the 4th to 16th century, to that of the kingdoms from 17th to 19th century, throughout the colonial period, and these histories rendered by professional chroniclers and musicians. You know them, very well known. They are the so-called griots in West Africa. So the clan of the poet has always and had an appointed patron of whom he is the undisputed specialist of history. So this history, these texts belong to the patron, not to the performer. It's really important. The text belong not to the performer, but to the patron. So what happens when the post-colonial state, under the aegis of international organizations, decides to grant copyright to creators such as the griots, such as these musicians, such as these composers, such as these creators? I, as you say, won't use any highly sophisticated material to try to convey my ideas. Zoom is already highly sophisticated, and therefore I won't use any PowerPoint and share any screens. So let's try to keep at the word and try to follow me, since it won't be very long. So let's get to my first point. First point is called the Age of Law. So Neil Weinstock Nathaniel delivers a nice chronology of the events which will deal with copyright. So key moment is 1967, when World Intellectual Property Organization, the World Intellectual Property Organization, was funded with the central mission, I quote, to promote the protection of intellectual property throughout the world, quote, end of quotation. This was 67. In 1974, a new international economic order was launched. The goal of that one, I quote, was to promote creative intellectual activity and facilitating the transfer of technology related to industrial property to developing countries in order to accelerate economic, social, and cultural development, end of quote. And what's interesting here, what is really, very, very telling here is that no contradiction has been detected by the World Intellectual Property Organization called WIPO. No contradiction has been detected by WIPO between this development objective of these new international economic order and the expanding worldwide copyright. So you have copyright on one side and development objective on the other side. So you have 1967 and you have 1978, and you have a kind of tension between two objectives, developmentalist and copyright. So 2003, the Director General of the WIPO declared, quote unquote, intellectual property is a power tool for economic development and wealth creation, end of quote. So it's clear that here the goal is all about money, so to say, intellectual property as power tool of economic development and wealth creation. In this case, since 1978, and under the auspices of the Berne Convention, the Berne Convention is 1886. So under the auspices of the Berne Convention and its avatars, the government of South Africa, of Mali, and several other countries created so-called copyright offices or took copyright acts. The stated objective of the promoters of this enterprise was and remained to establish copyright according to the Western paradigm in African countries. The only paradigm, the sole paradigm is that. By the end of the 1980s, protecting copyright became very fashionable. It was totally in. It was really sexy to protect copyright in the 80s. So police supporting customs invaded warehouses and other establishment of traders who were qualified as pirates. The example of Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Mali, and Nigeria are eloquent in this regard. Others amplifies them widely. As a result, competition was raging between counterfeiters of cassettes, CDs, DVDs, musicians, and authorities. The slogan was, "Go faster than pirates," in order to sell one's own original merchandise before counterfeiters take hold of it and flood the market. So you got to go faster than pirates. We know that the state is attacking a robust market, CDs, DVDs, and cassettes, among others, that is known through the South, the Southern Hemisphere, namely the progressive sidewalk market that Arvind Singh described in India. And Sundaram has analyzed this market as well, considering piracy as the twin sister of increased control over intellectual property. So face to face are actors, the wholesale bosses, and the employees who walk the street with counterfeit products. The two authors compare, Sundaram and Singh, compare the fate of young people to modern serfs who take all risks, earn little, are harassed and arrested by the police. Lobato, another author, considers piracy as a form of popular resistance against capitalism. On this subject, he recalls the interpretation of Sundaram, who opposes pirate modernity to the monolithic and imperial one of the West. So according to them, there is a sort of combat between this pirate modernity and the imperial one, the Western one. Let's get back to the field for an inventory that ends with a perspective of intellectual property of intangible goods with other similar objects. Let's go to the field and try an inventory. The field would be, so where I conducted my research, would be Mali. And let's say, first, why is Mali interesting in this regard? You know that better than I do. You have many Grammy Award winners in Mali, so Ali Farka Touré, Toumani Diabaté, Oumou Sangaré, etc., etc. So what does the state of Mali say as far as this issue is concerned? What are the state, the producers, and the artists doing? I was able to interview one of the Malian Copyright Office's veteran agents on several occasions in the 2009, 2010, 2011. He conveyed the artists the message of the state and the message of the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And I quote, he meant that a work, and this is what he was telling to these musicians, and I was there, I just collected this information. I quote, a work for an individual is like a hoe, which serves him as an instrument in his her field. It used to be an entertainment. Nowadays, with copyright, we have an instrument and we live from it. End of quotation. So the artists, on the strength of their new rights, therefore tend to assert themselves. And this is really important. Since artists and workers of the Copyright Office and the police are all from the same society, the rules dictated by law do not always govern their relationship. But sometimes personal and social relationships that the artist and the copyright officer brings into play. So this is a confrontation between the paternalism of the state, which wants to take charge and protect the artist to whom rights are granted, and the employees of the state grappling with their own network. Each of the protagonists, the state and the employees on one side, and these copyright people, so the artists. So you have these two poles, and each of the protagonists tries to navigate as best as possible. And this is what is happening in the day-to-day, in the daily basis. What does the state do beyond creating copyright offices? The state funded subventions to the artists through a copyright office. The state hunts and counts. But this actionist attitude conceals the strong trend that has taken place, namely the decrease of enthusiasm for hunting pirates and their objects. So this enthusiasm to hunt dropped. How? So let's take a case of Burkina Faso. The Burkina, head of the Copyright Office, whom I interviewed a couple of times, confirmed this trend and said that the expenses for a police raid were far from being offset by the fines and confiscation inflicted on counterfeiters. So what to do with the small dealers who are trying to do business and make a living while the big wigs of counterfeiting live in peace? What to do in this case, he asked me. So private entrepreneur did not follow the example set by the government. According to one of the copyright executive officers, the grievance against the office can be summed up as follows. I quote, "What do you stick your nose into?" This was this phrase. This was this grievance of these counterfeiters against the state. In addition, these business people raise the threat of democracy in order to warn the Copyright Office in its mission to protect copyright in the new democratic state of Mali. So the same senior copyright official confronted with the political authorities declares, if by legal means radio stations are frightened to pay the copyright due, we fear that people will claim that press and freedom are under attack. And this is really important because you have in Mali a thriving landscape of FM radios. And these FM radios are publishing days and days, years and years, music for which they didn't pay any penny to the Copyright Office or to artists. And the issue is that when the Copyright Office tried to ask them and to oblige them to pay for this music, they complained and said that this Copyright Office would like to mute them, actually. They don't want them to play this music, they want to mute them. And muting press, radio in a democratic context is just being against democracy. So copyright versus democracy. And this is a very interesting way of arguing against this implementation of copyright and against this issue called copyright. What do the promoted and the other providers say and do? Because you see, for example, as far as these radio, these FM radio owners, we got a sense of their argumentation. We got also the sense of the argumentation of the ones who engaged in private television stations and so on and so forth. These all thrives in the context of democracy, so to say, and these all have the same argumentation. Democracy means publishing, and publishing is jeopardized by the Copyright Office, by copyright law, etc. So what do artists do in this context? And this is really interesting for us. So artists, whoever they are, these Grammy Prize holders and little ones, whoever they are, harmoniously combine the two types of forms. Copyright from the official scene, made up of radio stations, of television channels, but also gains from private rooms, courtyards, or street in Bamako and elsewhere. So the boundaries between elites and ordinary people are surprisingly porous, as Karim Barber observes so well for popular culture. So you have these big wigs who are also taking advantage of these ordinary opportunities to make money on the ground. So in Mali or in Africa, let's say so. And they are also on these major platforms on the international international scale, on the international agenda. So there is a sort of juggling between two fora, between two forums. So from all this, the following conclusion could be made. First, the Malian state and others and its law grants copyright, a right whose limits are quickly measured by the protagonists. As a total social fact, this right faces a local framework that resists it and sometimes accepts it on a daily basis. It's a matter of negotiation. Then the state caught up in its contradictions generated by its own servants turns out to be a break on its own scheme inspired by international institutions. I mean, WIPO, for example. Finally, a minority seizes the benefits of the law that say the majors are the benefactor of the law. Let me conclude, since I have only 20 minutes, 25 I will try to do, sorry about this. Why accept this law, which ignores the current millennial standards as themselves, the ordinary people who are confronted with the consequences of the implementation of copyright? So why accept this law? In fact, the copyright, through the romantic author that it endangers, loses completely the essence of historical and cultural context in which it's operating. So this romantic author, who is just an individual, who is just a person like in the West, is invented in the African context and trying to implement this type of copyright in a context which is not necessarily prepared for it and which is necessarily open to other modi of functioning. Of course, collective and this mode of functioning is that in this case, you have from time to time a sort of collective mode of producing these cultural products. Of course, collective doesn't mean anonymous, to be clear. The introduction of copyright raises hopes for enrichment and for promotion that are quickly disappointed in many cases. Everybody cannot triumph like the Solomon Linda family did it against these multi-billionaire companies called a company called Walt Disney in the United States. But what we are confronted with here is the implementation of a system which recognized only the romantic authors, which recognized only the individual and not the context of creation, which was there before 1968. And in this case, we are in we are in a situation that there is no room for the Western way of seeing things. There is no room for what Francis Nyanjo called incompletude. There is no room for this. They are complete and they are the ones who are running the show, so to say. In the meantime, music, dance, and various forms of performance related to them are subject to what Foyer called the injunction to economically develop the resources. So it's about making money and big chunk of money. Faced with this reality, the actress and actors are abandoning the most risky practices. The most risky practices do mean sticking to one's own way. If you are doing only this usual way of making money on the street, you may lose. It's better that you get also as supplementary revenue your copyright. The same is true for the ones who are making money out of copyright. They are also tempted to continue to perform on the street or in the families or in these local and traditional circumstances to make money. So both are struggling, so to say. More than ever, the diversity, their field of action, with or without copyright, is their philosophy. You navigate with and without. And this way of traveling is the day-to-day praxis and the day-to-day philosophy of these musicians. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mamadou, for that very interesting and very rich paper. As I was listening to it, I could substitute Mali with other African countries as I realized what you're talking about and what you're presenting, what artists face and what musicians face vis-a-vis copyrights and wealth creation, it almost sounded like it could be replicated. The same study could be replicated for another African country and not just Mali, and the same findings could stand out because of the contradictions of trying to make wealth and also trying to stick within the laws and confines of copyrights, but then not generating as much wealth for them as they had hoped. And also the point you touched on, democracy versus copyrights, was an very interesting point, and I could resonate with that. So at the end of the day, what does the artist do? The artist wants, like, the artist is there to make a living from the performance, to make a living from the, to generate wealth, really, from, to generate wealth, really, from what they're doing. And at the end of the day, they're not paid by radio stations. What do they do? What resources and avenues do they have? And it was really insightful. Thank you for that. Before I open up to the floor, I would ask, I'll ask you if you have reactions, comments, questions. You can post them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I can give you an opportunity to speak. But before that, I just want to thank I want to thank the OSF advisory group that advises this project, and that is Professor Francis Nyomje, Professor Jean Bernard Obrigado, sorry if I pronounced that very wrong, Professor Fatima, and Professor Wungi Wagaro. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion today. And you can post your questions in the chat. I'll start with my question. So, Mamadou, what, in your opinion, what is the best, like, I thought that, like, in my opinion, I realized that, like, Mali adopted the copyrights, but it adopted as is. It didn't, like, the laws and the rights were not adapted to the context of Mali as a country and to the needs of the artists when they were crafting the laws. What would be the best way for artists, publishers, musicians, or what is the best way forward for the ordinary people that money does not trickle down to? What's the best way forward, or the best policy, or the best way forward to benefit from this copyright?
I think, thank you very much, Itai, for this question. I think this is the toughest you could ask me because I'm not that far to suggest solutions for this thorny problem. I think one of the solutions is exactly what these artists and these creators are following, that say, being aware of their proper history, their proper social and economic context, political context, taking advantage of these and not giving up these modern setting and these lawmaking. So they are trying to straddle between two systems. And while the state, I mean, while the international organizations ignore completely these ways of doing on the ground, these practices on the ground, these way of people to operate themselves at home as they did it for centuries, as these way of coming in an imperial way and putting a law on the desk. So they are not saying, okay, we won't do it. They won't be able to do so.
No, it is. Thank you very much. And another thing that I picked up from what you said is awareness. Artists need to know the law. Whoever copyrights something, like, information is not readily available. And that's one avenue we can start from. Make information be available to everyone. Everyone should know, either by pamphlets, by awareness campaigns, by publicizing it in the radios and the televisions. That's one way of boosting awareness of for artists, for everybody to know how to maneuver and what the law actually means and how everyone can benefit from it. Okay, Divine has his hand up. You can go ahead and ask your question, Divine.
Thank you very much, Mamadou, for the privilege of listening to such very rich research and presentation, and also honing on a question that is really relevant now, especially given the ways in which we are transferring to the digital, where what we would have hitherto had as, you know, stuff that we have saved somewhere else becomes a public good. So thank you really much. So my question is on, it's very simple. It's just, what do we lose and what do we gain by reading what one would call the ordinaire? I think it's better expressed in French as création. I'm not sure the term creativity actually captures that well. I think it's more a création. So what do we lose or gain when we read this through a copyright? Also, given that a copyright emerges out of a particular kind of, in some ways, an epistemological experience, in some ways an ontological experience, and also a certain worldview. It also comes from a kind of a particular framework, as you've demonstrated, which is also a relationship about between the subject and what is called imagination, you know, in modernity or in modern thinking, I want to talk particularly, there is a big debate now. I see that Stephanie and Francois also in the session. There's a big debate now about Plan S, this new project that is being launched, by this group of funders to turn publishing or knowledge into a public good. But of course, it's got consequences. What does it mean to turn people's ideas into public good? What does it mean to turn collective ideas into public good? What does it mean to transfer these debates that are already that are framed, I think, within particular context in Europe to an African context? And my question is, what do we lose? What do we lose and what do we gain by reading through all of this through copyright? And should we just abandon this thing called copyright?
Thank you, Ludovin. This is really an exciting question. What do we lose? What do we gain? If we continue to read through the lens of copyright, I think we shouldn't, and this is about being worried, we shouldn't read copyright through a single lens. Copyright, if we see it through its history, the Berne Convention is 1886. The United States of America spent 1 century before accepting it. And before this, what they did is looting systematically all what has been invented somewhere else. Second point, Russians or Soviet Union accepted it a couple of years after the United States. And before this, the Chinese didn't accept it. Now they accepted it. They wanted to implement it plentifully, and in applying plentifully, the United States might be in trouble because of the mastering of this domain, and before of disadvantages which might be not favorable to the United States. This is the second point. The third point is related to copyright and droit d'auteur. They're different. They're different. So we shouldn't think that the concept, which is a truly boîte noire, it's a black box, which is sold us nowadays, we shouldn't take it as granted. We should unpack it. Unpacking it shows us very clearly its multi-dimensionality. It's multi-dimensional. And if you are, we know this multi-dimensional dimension of copyright, we could put it into question. We could question it. And even if copyright in the so-called West is already plural, why should we buy it in Mali or in South Africa or in Africa as a singular or a simple or a unique fact which is imposed on us, upon us? And this is a very serious issue, this issue of unpacking it. And third, and lastly, if we accept this phenomenon to reduce creativity to money, we are jeopardizing the whole basis, the whole foundational basis of this, because we will be in a situation where all will be converted into money. And what is interesting in this case, because you have a very nice, very interesting discussion in this copyright business, where some of these experts in this domain said that if all is copyrighted, what would be the domain which will be free in order to be creative? If there is no room for creativity because everything is sealed, you can't touch anything else in order to be creative. So, and this is the problem with copyright, which tends, if exaggerated, to touch its own borders, its own ends. And this is a problem as well. So the issue is now in how much should we put this into question? Should we question these? And in order to do that, we should be knowledgeable. And this is key.
Thank you very much, Mamadou. Ladies and gentlemen, I have run out of time, but I'll extend it for just 10 minutes. There are 3 burning questions in the chat for you, Prof. And David is asking, what will be your comment, Prof, to use local language for copyright information sharing and education? I'll say all 3 to you so that you can just answer him once. And then his second question is, what will be the modest method for copyright regulations or laws in Africa? And then the last question that will...
Excuse me, this question?
Okay, let me repeat that again.
Yes, please.
What would be the modest method for copyright regulations or laws in Africa?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last question will come from Job. You can unmute yourself and say your question, Job. And then Prof can answer all 3 at the same time.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Professor Mamadou, for your wonderful presentation. And it's very nice to learn about copyright and its colonial and capitalistic nature. What I wanted to know from you, or rather to get a thought from you, is whether you think copyright as an aspect goes against the African philosophy and culture of collective ownership of knowledge production and dissemination, and how best we can decolonize this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So this is really fantastic. You are bringing up great issues, great questions. Local languages for copyright, I think this is a very nice point which could answer to the second question, to my view. I think we definitely need this, desperately need this, because, because what? Because these artists I met in Mali, in Burkina, in Senegal, and in Mauritania, the vast majority of them do not only read and understand necessarily French first. The ones who understand French are not necessarily writing French or English. But this is not new for you. You know this already. So in order that these people could use these laws or understand them, of course, the mother tongues would be very, very useful. But even if they know these languages, French, English, German, Japanese, whatever, is not enough in order to understand law. Law is written in a foreign language even for the ones who know the language in which it's written. Law is a matter of lawyers, and we got to be worried in order that the ones who deal with these know their way around as far as the content of law is concerned. It's highly technical, and understanding the language is not only getting access to what is written. If you get access to it, let's say if you read English and you take the law relative to copyright, you won't understand it. So I think we have to go on both, we have to operate both ways. Getting access to these through our mother tongues, definitely, and getting access to it through the technical mastery of the matter, let's say law. So the third question is related to copyright against African philosophy of common appropriation. I would be very cautious in this case. I mentioned in how much copyright is reducing intellectual production, intellectual creation to private appropriation. And this is, of course, odd because, as I mentioned, copyright, if it goes in this direction, it goes to a point where creation is impossible because everything will be sealed. You can't touch to an element in order to create another element because you are touching private property. And this is absolutely absurd. And of course, this copyright issue is also absurd in the Western system at some point. So the point is, for me now, this African philosophy of common appropriation. So even in African philosophy, the things which I studied on the ground in these countries I mentioned, this music which is produced by a creator, man or woman, but this product is not his or her property. It is for the patrons for whom this music is composed, etc., etc. There is no common appropriation here. There is no exclusivity in terms of money, but there is definitely no common appropriation. So we got to be worried. Africa doesn't mean communitarism, according to what I learned from these local laws. How to decolonize it, I don't really get the concept. If decolonize means changing it from colonial time to nowadays, if colonial means making it, operating it in a way where no appropriation exists. Appropriation exists even in African context. The one I studied, it does exist. You got to be initiated, you got to learn it, you got to be from family X or Y in order to learn it, etc., etc., etc. There is no common appropriation. So therefore, I would be grateful if you could define these aspects related to decolonialization, because decolonial doesn't mean here at all private or common. There is no contradiction between both. Even in this African context, there are clearly creations which are part of the family X, family Y, etc., etc. Is not communitarist. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mamadou. That's a Like that's a very rich analysis. From the charts, they're very interesting comments thanking you. I liked this one, and I'm going to read it to you. It says from Professor Francis Nyomja. He says, "Thanks for delicious and hopefully uncopyrighted food for thought, Mamadou." Thank you. And there's so many people saying thank you for that. An hour was not enough for you. We needed to talk to you more. We'll consider inviting you again or having you at the podcast. Thank
I
you.
love it. Thank you so much indeed, and thank you for teaching me such wonderful ideas and wonderful suggestions has been made. I'm absolutely grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, we have run out of time, and I'm so grateful. Thank you for being with us today. I would like to thank Mamadou for your generous time to come and share these insights with us. And I'd also like to thank the colleagues from LastPart, Professor Mampenda Ba and Rashid Yassin. Thank you for being part of this. And I'd like to thank the marketing team for this project and also the advisory board for this project. Thank you. We really appreciate you coming. And I'd like to especially also thank the funders. They are in the room and would like to appreciate Sonia and the team that you work with, Sebastian. We really appreciate you funding this project. And thank you very much. The funders from the Open Society Foundation. And I'd also like to thank the UMA member the UMA teammates for coming for the session. Thank you for your support. I'd like to invite everybody. Our next session for this African Publishing Seminar Series is on the 18th of May, 2021, and it will be in French this time. We're trying to disseminate in as many languages as we can, and French is one of them. It'll be in French on the 18th, make a date for that. And the speaker for that seminar series is going to be Marc Ledoux. So please come and let's share insights on how to strengthen African publishing and dissemination and strengthening the ecosystem. And thank you so much for your time. And you can follow us on the recording for this is on Facebook. You can also find it on YouTube. You can also follow us and our events on the UMA website. There's always something for you that you can look for Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. Please join us. You can, Divine will post the information of the events on the chat. Thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you, colleagues.
Thanks.